welcome to the ORNL seminar again. If you're a graduate student, just make sure you're doing your reflections on ELC and you're signing in as well. I'm excited to have Dr. Alex Kasingo today as our guest speaker. Dr. Kasingo is from the African College of Wildlife Management in Mweka, Tanzania. Mweka is really close to Mount Kilimanjaro. It's actually right at the base. There's one of the climbing routes goes right out of Mweka. And a group of students were actually fortunate enough to go visit the University of Mweka, or the African College of Wildlife Management in Mweka back in last December. And they were so gracious to us. They hosted us, and we got to walk around campus with their students. And it was just kind of eye-opening to learn from that. Dr. Kasingo has just a wealth of experience in wildlife management. He got his PhD at the University of Victoria in British Columbia. And just excited to have him here talking about community governance and wildlife resources. So, floor is yours, Dr. Kasingo. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm happy to be here, and thank you so much to Dr. Bynum. Welcome here again to the university to accept me coming to Georgia. My first time back, but my first time to the United States, so it was more good. So I'm going to talk about the community governance of wildlife resources and the achievement and setbacks in Tanzania, but more on the northern part of Tanzania. And I work for the College of African Wildlife Management, as Dr. Bynum said. This institution is on the foothills of Mount Kilimanjaro. It's not as old as the University of Georgia. It's only 60 years old, but in Tanzania it means that this is very old because we got independence 63 years ago. So having an institution which is 50 years old is very old, nearly as old as the country itself. But it was established to provide training to African wildlife managers right after independence. Most countries in Africa got independence in the 1960s. So there was this fear by the colonial powers that when they hand over independence to African governments, they will not conserve wildlife anymore. So they thought it's very important they establish a school which will be training African conservationists. So it has been training students from 28 African countries and 60 other non-African countries. So nearly every country go in Africa, you know, people who are going to this school to do some studies. So that's where I'm coming from. My talk is going to talk a bit about the Tanzania, a brief about Tanzania, and then we'll cover some aspect of the history of community governance of wildlife in Tanzania, but most in northern Tanzania. And achievements in community governance in wildlife conservation, and I look on the challenge of setbacks that we have encountered in Tanzania on the issue of community governing wildlife resources. And we'll see what are some of the take-home messages. So that's how I'm starting this talk. And I take wildlife here, our Tanzanian meaning of wildlife, you take all the wild animals, so then being birds, then being invertebrates, the terrestrial, aquatic, so the fish is also a wildlife in Tanzania. And then it includes their habitats. So the forests, the aquatic environment, and all the biodiversity. To us, it's regarded as wildlife. So that's what I'm considering here as wildlife. Now, if we do a little brief about Tanzania, it's a country in East Africa. So it's a part of Africa. I think some have probably been there, some have heard of it. It's bordered with Kenya, Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo, Zambia, Malawi, Mozambique, and then the eastern part is the Indian Ocean. So it's a country about 1 billion square kilometers. It's not as big as the United States, but it's somewhere in African context, it's one of the biggest countries. And in this country, you will have protected areas. About over 100% of the country, terrestrial areas, is gazetted as protected areas, particularly wildlife protected areas. So here I'm talking in terms of what we call national parks, some nature reserves. We do have game reserves, areas where we can do some consumptive use. But again, we do have areas that are owned by the communities. So we call them community wildlife management areas. And then you can add in areas which are forest reserves. So somehow it reaches about 35% of the country being somehow protected as either forestry or wildlife protected areas. Now, Tanzania, we don't even call it Tanzania, it's Tanzania, we call it the United Republic of Tanzania because it has two parts. So you have the mainland Tanzania and Zanzibar. So sometimes people say they're going to Zanzibar, yes, they're going to Tanzania. And that's why you have now the Kilimanjaro, Serengeti, Ngorongoro, it's in Tanzania. So I think that one is enough to talk about Tanzania in that way. Now, northern Tanzania, the place that is bordering Kenya, it's also known for conservation for years. Most of the first protected areas were established in those areas, like the Serengeti, Ngorongoro, Kilimanjaro, and many others were established at that time. So it's a place where conservation is something that has been there and people are using it. So if the benefits and the nasty part of conservation, then they know it. And these are very important areas. So we talk of these areas because it's also the communities around have been with wildlife for so many years, for generations and generations. So around Tanzania, management of wildlife have been mainly done by establishing protected areas. And that have been done since before 1990s. So when the Germans came in 1980s, slowly they started preparing areas to start the form of protected areas. Some areas that, okay, this at least was set aside as hunting reserves. And this was Serengeti because they thought, okay, there is this teeming of wildlife everywhere, and you go there, you see all the wildlife. So they thought that this one should be somewhat preserved for few of us to be hunting. So you have that aspect of them being establishing protected areas, and we have established and people say that about 35% of the country is protected areas in themselves. But again, we do regulate the use. So we don't allow everybody to go there and do consumptive use. We do have some levels of consumptive use of wildlife which we accept, but you have to be having a permit for that. And not everybody just go there in the morning you start getting hunting the wildlife or anything. So at least we regulate the use. But also we use a strategy of changing people's attitudes and the consumption patterns on wildlife. So as I said here, the issue of wildlife taking and the fisheries and the other things in there. So what do you eat and those kind of things. I was raised up in Serengeti, and at that time, we'll do the bit of watching, you know. The kind of meat that I knew was wild meat. And it was not normal in the community for people to slaughter a cattle or goats or anything because the wildlife, they were there. So at least somehow they will pass through the village, you will illegally harvest one or two, and then the village will eat. So now starting a bit changing our understanding about the conservation about these species, starting to tell us that okay, even if you eat domestic animals, you still get the protein. So that I started to try to change our consumption patterns, but again we can use seasonal control of access. Sometimes in the lakes, which are in the community areas, we give them probably 6 months of harvesting, and then you have 3 months of closing the lake. You can come with the fishing gears and whatever kind of gears we use to harvest from the wild. So all this can be another strategy that we use to conserve the wildlife. But then exclusion of human beings either temporarily or permanently. So we do have some areas that in the protected areas, many protected areas, they don't allow human beings to live in there, except at least one protected area in the Tanzania, which is Ngorongoro Conservation Area, where we allow people to live in there with their livestock and then we have wildlife management. But the rest of the areas, we don't allow people to live in there. So at least that one is permanent exclusion. But then temporarily, sometimes in areas where we allow the game control area where communities can also use for grazing. But during the hunting season, we'll exclude people probably for the 6 months of hunting, and then they can use it later in the other season. So at least it's also another strategy we use to conserve wildlife. But again, we have the issue of actively managing the habitats. That's what the issue like controlling invasive species, wood encroachers in rangelands. So sometimes we will have active management of these. The other times we use fire, sometimes we have to uproot them and those kind of things. So all these are different strategies, and there are many, many more of which we use as strategies to manage the wildlife. And now as you see, managing wildlife is not as simple. I'm sure even here in Canada and Georgia, it's not the same that it's a state definition that you do this one, the wildlife is there. There's a lot of problems associated with that. So it's not I think there is a lot of challenges, and it's very complex, and it involves sometimes actors whose interests and values are not compatible. So when you're busy trying to establish a protected area, manage the place, you have very good areas for grazing. Somebody is thinking of the same areas for farming. Somebody is thinking of the same areas for settlements. When you are thinking this species is endangered, it should not be hunted, somebody is thinking of using it as food. So somehow you will have to involve those actors that have different values, interests, and stakes in conservation. But again, we have the issue of increased human population and the changes in consumption pattern. 1961, when we got independence, we were about 9 million to 12 million people in the country. And currently, we are thinking of 64 million to 65 million. So you see the population is increasing very fast. Just over 62 years already have 65 million people. And the land area is still the same. We are not going to get the next time, probably the United Nations will say, okay, we take this part of Congo to be your area because we have increasing population. That will not happen, isn't it? So when the population increase, even sometimes those areas that used to be for wildlife, that are not protected areas, but wildlife used to use them as a dispersal areas or corridors, we see now these areas being inhabited by people looking for opportunities for agriculture, settlements. And this brings people close to the wildlife frontiers. So you have more and more clashes between wildlife and people. This is because of increasing population. But again, even the pattern of consumption, people have changed. So you find that at those days, probably you used to hunt 1 or 2 wildlife and using that community. But nowadays, people in urban centers, they also want that wild meat. Their head wild meat is good. So they are ready to put a premium that they get that wild meat transported from Serengeti to Dar es Salaam, which may be more than 1,000 kilometers away. But only they have that thinking that, okay, probably wild meat have certain values, I can get certain sort of powers and everything. So that one is a problem. But then we have the changing climates. It's a very serious problem that the climate change, yes, sometimes you hear climate change, we think it's something political, it's imaginary, all those kind of things, but it's really happening. So we more and more get more extreme droughts in most parts of the country. And whenever you have extreme drought, then livestock will be struggling to get water and getting forage. The same applies to wild animals again, will be struggling to get water and forage. So at the end of the day, you have more and more clashes between the wildlife and livestock, and then increase the conflict between human and the wildlife. So that one becomes more and more a problem. So when we're dealing with wildlife management, is something which is not simple, it's complex, and as it is in many other parts of the world. So in Tanzania, it's not immune to that. Now, when we talk of wildlife in Tanzania, wildlife belongs to the state. So it's a government property. So even if tomorrow I get a deer from here and I get license to take it to Tanzania, the moment it reaches Tanzania, then the first it change to become a government property, and then they can give me a permit to stay with it and use it. But at least the wildlife, wherever it's found, belongs to the state. But they can give you a permit to use them for different purposes. Now, since before in colonial times, in 1890s back, wildlife was there. Communities used to use wildlife, but it used to be under the control of their leader, the chiefs. So they will decide who to hunt, when to hunt, what kind of animals to hunt. There were animals hunted for the chiefs. When the chief have a gathering, they will hunt a certain animal. There are animals that were there for the general public. And you don't just go there and the hunt is 10 while you only need one. So at least some sort of level of protection was there. But then we started having this form of protected areas when the Germans came in 1885, and then later the British came after the First World War. They kept on putting more protected areas. And then when we got independence, we even put more protected areas. But this time when we are making the protected area, it was that time when you used to chase out people. You go there in the village, you chase them away from the area. Those who don't want to go, you put fire into their hearts and everything. And the place will be burning and everybody will be running like rats. And then next morning we put the protected areas, put beacons. It's a protected area. You don't come here, you have a license, those kind of things. But then after independence, people thought that, okay, now we go to independence. Those were the issue for the German and the British. Now the government is going to give us back the land and everything. But we found that, okay, that's not possible. The independent country, the governments went on using the same kind of rules and everything as it used to be the colonial power. They even established even more protected areas because already they understood about the issue of having areas to be conserved as protected areas. But then, at that time, we had two camps, the Western and the Eastern, the United States camp and the Soviet Union at that time. We are more of a socialist country. So we are more on the leading somewhat to the Soviet Union. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, everything changed. That if you want to have some money to pay your police, anybody, you don't have, you have to go to the World Bank, the IMF, to look for a loan. And then they will ask you some questions. Do you have democracy in your country? You say no. Your government is using too much money because they have employed this much people. So we are given some conditions, where they retrench people, government should not do business, don't do this and this and this. So that was okay. In the 1990s, we accepted the condition from the IMF and the World Bank. We did the structural adjustment programs. But by doing that, we retrenched a lot of people from government jobs. And we didn't employ people for 10 years. One of the sectors that was really affected was the natural resource management sector, particularly the forest reserves and well-protected areas, because people were not employed in there. So you have probably the entire Serengeti with the 5 or 6 wardens, 14,000 kilometers square, without probably a vehicle to be able to do the patrols. So things were not happening. And now the cartels come in and the poachers started harvesting the elephants and everything. So things were not working. So it was simple, yeah, it's not working, the government cannot employ people. Then give the communities the task of protecting the wildlife, because they are the ones that are doing the poaching, give them the opportunity to do that one. So we started establishing the issue of community-based conservation in 1990s to present, at least start involving communities in conservation. But these communities are worried because they know wildlife belongs to the state. And if you are caught with wildlife, you are taken to court and you'll be jailed. Because sometimes we started a bit of awareness raising and those kind of, even to date, they don't really believe that they can be really managing wildlife and owning the wildlife. It's not that much easy. But at least we have some changes from the fortress and fines conservation where we have the protected areas, so fence, you don't come in there, you come in there, you get penalized. Slowly we are moving out of that to start showing that communities can also manage wildlife resources in some areas which are set aside for that. It's not simple, probably we are not achieving much, but at least it's a step forward. So currently communities are involved in wildlife conservation. In some areas, they have established areas we call community wildlife management areas, or WMAs. In some areas, they have established conservation in business areas where they say, okay, we have set aside this area of the village to put to a wildlife investor who come there to be investment for wildlife and tourism. Some of the areas, they establish land trusts. They give it to somebody to run on their behalf. All these are different ways that these communities are involved in conserving the wildlife. And it has worked in some areas, have some challenges, and we keep on solving those challenges, moving forward. Sometimes you go back 2 steps, you move 1 step forward, it's good. So we see these kind of things. So we really have the wildlife management areas as our community-based natural resource sort of a flagship for Tanzania. That's why we're dealing with the wildlife. And communities decide to put down the land use plan for their village, and they set aside the areas which you think they have sizable populations, and you have 2, 3, 4 villages coming together. They decide how to put their land together so that at least they can only use it as a one protected area. They put down a community-based organization to manage this, and then they apply to the director of wildlife to give them a permit to get involved in wildlife-related business, like having a hunting investor in their land, having photographic investors in their land, those kind of things. So the WMAs decide that there are some of the land uses that are compatible to wildlife conservation. So like somebody coming there to do photographic tourism, that is compatible. Somebody coming there to do tourist hunting, yes, that one is okay. Somebody doing resident hunting for it, if they are permit, that's okay. So somewhere in the zoning of that area, they put out the zones for tourism development, for hunting, for resident hunting, those kind of things. But also they decide that there are some of the land uses we think, this one that is not compatible with it, with conservation. So things like crop farming in that area, we think that's not compatible. So when you're doing the land use planning for the village, you will have an area in the village that is set aside for farming. Settlement, we think that's not good for conservation, so it's not good in the WMA. But again, in some other areas, most cases, livestock grazing is not good for wildlife management areas. So at least you push it out. And we see that there is an implication for this kind of thinking when you are dealing with community-based areas. So if you look at that one, then the way we treat wildlife management areas, there are some of the land uses that are acceptable, and some of the land uses that are not acceptable. Then they change wildlife management areas to look like any other form of protected areas. So if they go to national park, livestock grazing is not allowed, farming is not allowed, settlement is not allowed. I come to this community-based area, which we own it ourselves as a community. Again, those things are not allowed. So at the end of the day, you feel that there's very little difference between community-owned and the government-owned protected areas. And you find that because of that, there have been a bit of some acceptance of this concept, particularly in agro-pastoral communities, or some of crop farming, and even though, yes, they accept it to be there, it's not making trouble with it, but they will be watching it there. But when you come to the community that they are really dealing with livestock keeping, and their main livelihood options, they don't accept that concept because in the same pasture they need for their livestock. So tomorrow, if you tell them that you cannot get the animals into this area to graze, so they seem to them that no, this is not working for the community. So somewhere you see some resentment in some communities on that aspect because of not putting the grazing and permitted in practice. And we see here now there is links to the cultural settings and the rewards. It becomes strong, particularly when communities have to try with conservation issues because yes, they look at their culture. Our culture is more linked to livestock grazing. That's our economy. And tomorrow, we want to support your conservation. At the end of the day, I'll be missing out on this, which I think is a very important part of my livelihood. So communities see these resources, the wildlife resources and the rangeland themselves, the way they see their values are not necessarily what we see them today in the conservation side. For instance, we have an issue there of voluntarily relocating people from the Ngorongoro conservation area, which is a multiple land use in the country. It allows people to live in there with their livestock, we allow tourism and wildlife management in the same area. But you thought, okay, these people are now many. We have to at least look at the sustainability of the area. Let's transfer these people to somewhere else or relocate them. But you say relocation, people don't hear that kind of naming anything. So we allow voluntary relocation. talk to them. Those who are happy to go, we compensate them, we build houses and everything to them. And then they go. So some have accepted going, some have said no, we remain here because it's our native areas and everything. But because of the values, the different values we see. So to me, I say, we're taking them from here, we build them good house there, we give them electricity, water, schools, and everything. And they still want to stay here. So sometimes when we look at them, we say, no, these people are not serious. Why they are in the bush like this? But because they see the different values. So it has seen a bit of resistance because of the way that they see the rewards and the cost of moving to the other areas. It's different from what the conservationists see or from what the government sees. So their decisions is more tied to the perceptions associated with what they want, and some of these are passed down generations. So these people, they were the same people who were in Serengeti National Park when it was established in the 1890s. These are the people that their hands were touched by fire and they were chasing their way and everything. But now you can stay in Ngorongoro. So they are there, and then today, they have been there, let's take them out. So even if you come and tell them with a very good rational thinking, some of them will not be able to accept because already historically, they have been told these guys sometimes they're not that much trustworthy. So trustworthiness is a problem in that kind of situations. Now, we talk of a case that is happening in the Eastern Serengeti, where one of our students, Fred Lady, who is working in Professor Harlow in the University of London, is doing the research. Eastern Serengeti is an important area of the Serengeti ecosystem. Serengeti ecosystem in Tanzania alone takes about 30,000 kilometers square of protected areas. And then you add the Masai Mara and the associated protected areas in Kenyan side to have somewhere up to 45,000 kilometers squares of area. And it goes from the Ngorongoro all the way to Lake Victoria. But then this side is the Kenyan side of the border, this is the Tanzanian side, so here you have the Serengeti ecosystem itself for this, and then you have the Masai Mara and the associated reserves in Kenya. It's a very important system with all those migrations. In terms of tourism, it's an important area. It's a World Heritage Site, it's a biosphere reserve, it's everything. And everybody moving to East Africa, they want to reach Serengeti. Now, the national park here is managed differently. You know, it's you're not allowed to come in there, you have to come with the permits and everything. You can go to graze animals, they are really going to there, they know how to manage the wetlands, they put the fires and everything. So they know how to do the vegetation burning. The next year, the grasses will grow good and the animals are healthy. But outside here, in the community area, they used to manage the land like the same those days because they have very big lands. So they will apply fire in some areas and sometimes they will not apply in other areas. So that at least they have this location plant planning to allow for grasses to grow. But now because of squeezing them in smaller areas, sometimes they are already even banning those areas because they're going to lose authority for the animals. So they keep on grazing in the same areas year after year after year, until when you ended up, the area lost much of its grasses and they start having some bush encroachment in these areas. And if you go and start talking to them about wildlife, you know, this area is very important. You have to apply fire and everything, they go, coming back to the same stories of establishing protected areas. So nobody is in support of that. But we saw the livestock economy going down, and if it's going down, next morning they may start encroaching the protected areas. But these areas are very important as calving grounds for one group of wildebeest which comes from northern areas of Kenya coming here. So they breed in Loliondo. So if the rangelands are not to bushes, then the wildebeest will not have somewhere to graze and breed during the rain seasons. During the rain season, the livestock are somewhere in the hills, so they don't bring them down here during the rain season. They will bring them here during the dry season. So we think, okay, we need the range for the rain season calving of the wildebeest, and they need the range for the dry season feeding of the livestock. So somewhere there is very good ecological separation in that. So somewhere if you go with them with a good concept, we thought the community should be able to accept. So we thought these are problems that we need urban grounds, but they also need the livestock economy to go on. So together we need to take out the bushes. So it was difficult now, how do you go and start talking to these communities, because there is this much big level of mistrust between communities and conservationists. You go there talking of conservation, they can even live with them. So we had to come with a project to bring back fire to those rangelands. And what we did, yes, we recruited a PhD student from the same community who have been working with them, so he's trusted. And so he's doing the studies in the same community, somebody who they start that is doing something good for their whole community. And then speak to the community themselves to give us some demonstration plots. So we got some areas to put the exposures, for which we are schooled the grazing in the area for some times. And then we see how the grasses are growing, comparing to those areas that have not been fenced. And then we apply fire at the end of the growing season, so that in the next season, we see what grows in these areas. So in doing that thing, we do it with the communities. If you see in these photos, on the other side here, you don't see that the grasses, small of the areas which have been invaded by the wood species that call it the acacias, which are falling. So naturally, if we leave them, the area will move to this because of too much grazing. So what we have done is talk to communities, and the communities offer the labor to go and cut down the woods in those enclosures, use the same wood to enclose the area of about 100 meters to 100 meters for the entire growing season. And then in the end of the growing season, then we call the community together. They also participate in burning these enclosures. So that one, they don't feel happy because they have seen the grasses growing. And then you're telling them again to burn, because you can see outside here there's no grasses, but inside there is enough grasses. And then they're telling them we're going to burn that one. And then you have to explain why you're burning that one. So for them to accept that one, they have to have trust in you and in the entire process that you're not going to change this in protected area. So you bring the communities in there, explain to them, and then we burn their exposures. These have been very important, and they worked very well for last year. And then when this year now, the enclosures were not there anymore because we banned everything within the fence, they saw more good grasses growing in those areas that were banned last year compared to those areas that were outside the exposure. So at the end of the day, somewhere, they have started understanding that is a very important process. And doing that one now, it is becoming a bit of we have seen some early sort of results, that there is a bit of an appreciation from the communities on how to control the encroachment using the fire, because they knew about fire those days, but they thought they can no longer apply it because the area is small, there's no grasses to burn and everything. But they have seen that it's possible to do that one. But again, the willingness by the community to set aside more areas now in their villages to put in this kind of program. And this is because we've been able to engineer them to understand that it's more going to facilitate their life for the economy than even for their wildlife itself. But again, we have seen the issue of values here was at play. Because when we went to communities, we are dealing with the rangelands for right of grazing, not the rangelands for wildlife management. So we're talking of the same resources, but we are talking about those values of which the community see as a value, rather than what we think it's going to be for wildlife. So in that way, at least there is a bit of a good progress. So community-based wildlife management areas, like those rangelands, we see some improvements. And conservation-wise, we have seen an increase in the size of the area under protection. Like this is an ecosystem, this is the increase of the but these areas here are community protected areas. So at least they have increased the size of the area that is an wildlife conservation, which is good. And we have seen again some key species like the elephants increasing in number. We have seen more general awareness of some communities about wildlife conservation and the need for that. So that one is at least a plus. We have seen some good again in terms of livelihood, that at least there is some things that's getting to the community coming from wildlife conservation. Some of these goes to community level. So things like roads, building their villages, establishing the wildlife management area, which is owned by the community themselves, it's a plus. But we have seen some community development projects, particularly most of the time social services, dispensaries, health centers, water facilities, schools, whatever, those kind of things built from the money that have been accrued for wildlife conservation. That seems to be a plus. But some improvement access to the scholarship to kids coming from those villages, but being able to establish some wildlife-based organizations and some general enterprise in conservation and tourism are being a good thing. We have seen in some areas having microcredit projects where at least they give some seed money to women and the youth groups, they start their own projects. It has gone like that one. And offering livestock vaccine for zoonotic diseases. But again, in some villages now, those issues of communities contributing money from their pockets to build a classroom, to build somewhere, teacher's house and everything. They don't do that one, then it comes from the wildlife management areas money. So that one again, it's a plus. But again, we have more involvement in terms of dealing with the problem animals. We have these animals coming out of protected areas, raining crops, killing livestock, and those kind of things. We see, because they have now their own game scouts in the villages, at least there's more of a bit of effectiveness in terms of dealing with wildlife problem animals. But then if you look at most of these areas, you have many of these that are realized at community level, not necessarily at the individual household level. The decision to do illegal harvesting or wildlife is not done at the community level, it's done more at the household level. So if you're not able to really take some rewards to touch the household level, they will still be doing the same decisions either to not support conservation. So somewhere there is a mismatch. But in terms of social achievements that we have seen because of them involving in community-based conservation, we have seen more and more awareness and empowerment by communities, because when they're establishing their own protected areas, they have to be able to do land use planning. So we give them some training to do land use planning, to know this area to be used for settlement, this for agriculture, this for grazing, this for conservation. So those communities that are dealing with conservation are more aware of this issue of land use planning than those who are not dealing with wildlife conservation. But again, we train them about leadership, about governance, the issue of human rights. We want them to have leaders, at least that percentage should be women. And so slowly they have changes. And you've seen some of the communities now, you see women there as the leaders in those community-based organizations, which is a plus at the end of the day, it can help in democratic governance. So there is that kind of improvement in those areas that they are dealing with wildlife conservation than those that are not dealing with wildlife conservation. And I say, yes, we have those kind of achievements, and that we do have some setbacks. Sometimes those areas have elite groups in the community, some people who are very popular in there, economically powerful, they can take out the decision-making powers, and sometimes even the finances coming out of the protected areas or conservation areas owned by the community, and then it gets into very little segment of the society. So that's a very big issue coming there, particularly in those communities where they have a very strong sort of leadership capital that probably this person is untouchable, you cannot ask them anything, then they can decide to do differently. But then there are those failure to see this benefit getting to the household level, I say to that. But we have the issue of decentralization, because the government gave power to communities to own wildlife. But somewhere in the middle, the community is not able to do this one. Why don't we take some of these powers back? So they centralize some of the powers, like decision making, how to look for investors, what kind of investment you can do somewhere. So it has changed back to the government. So that one alone, I've also eroded the trust the communities had to the government in terms of conservation. But again, we do have some corruption in there, because when you have some people who are untouchables in the community, they can also engage in corrupt practices themselves, themselves with investors or with other probably machineries outside the community. So there's still those kind of possibilities. So again, we saw there's still a bit of different perceptions of resource values between communities and other actors, and we've seen that in the rangelands. We see it probably very important for wildlife management. They see it very important for life of grazing. Until we reach somewhere and they understand their values and they understand your values and we see how we can move forward together, then it will still be difficult to ensure communities are also participating in conservation. We've been talking, bring more tourism, they get more money, it will be good. But then, yes, you are tourism money, it's not as important to them probably as the livestock benefit they get from the livestock. Because this tourism money we get at the community level, livestock money will come all the way to my family level. So we have those kind of but again, we sometimes stay somewhere and think, oh, this community will be needing school, they may be needing health center. So in the needs that we decide from outside the community, instead of engaging them, we understand their needs. So you may go there and build the project to which probably they don't really evaluate the need as the immediate need for them. We did a bit of a governance assessment and checking on different areas of the same ecosystem, some of those owned by the government and some of those owned by the communities. Together, they all fairly equal in governance. Out of 5, many of them were below average in most of the attributes that we looked at, from fairness, participation, responsiveness, and every transparency, accountability. At least they fairly better in terms of achievements, legitimacy because they are established by law and power. But the rest of the governance attributes that we evaluated, all the protected areas, be they community or government owned, they didn't fare better. So that was again another setback. But when you get to the integrated ecosystem, you have different actors doing conservation, community-based organizations, you have governments, you have no governments, you have no national parks, and everything. They are all dealing with the same animal. In the same way that is which move from this protected area to another protected area, they are all different when they move through the protected areas. But we found that these guys, even though they are working the same landscape, there is no much of their mutual communications between the different actors. So communities will be doing things on their own, the wildlife division will do things on their own, national parks will do things on their own, researchers on their own. So it's the same type of landscape, but it cannot improve because everybody is living on their own. And if we are thinking of meeting conservation goals, yes, we may be very good in protecting the elephant when they are in a community-based protected area, but when we move to the other protected area, those guys are not doing the same as they were doing. So you lose the same animals which you protected environment here. So that kind of having a presence of physical connectivity between themselves was good, but the governance connectedness, the issue of being able to communicate and everything, we didn't see it there. So then we found that one is again a negative side of it. So in terms of take away from this studies that I've said, we see community involved in the governance of wildlife resources. It's a matter of social exchange. They have their values, we have their values. They will always define what to give them as the rewards and the costs, and make them to decide on what to support or not to support. So the acceptance or sentiment from the communities is dependent on those attributes of costs and benefits, but again, on the past treatments, on the cultural settings that they are in, political, socio-economic, and related factors. So it's not just a simple business that, okay, they are going to get more money because they accept conservation. It's not necessary. But again, like many other settings, communities will maximize the rewards and minimize the costs associated with them. So if they're going to get more costs in terms of their livestock, so it's better not to accept your conservation ideology. So it's depending on how you get it into there. So community-based, again, it's not necessarily a solution. We're talking about conservation. And because we are seeing it's not immune to governance failures, corruption can get in there, nepotism can get in there, elite capture can get in there. It depends on how really you set it up to be able to benefit those at the bottom level of the community. Because those are the people who are getting cost of living in wildlife. Sometimes the one who got the cost of living in wildlife is not necessarily the one that received the benefit. And we have seen that what happens in those communities. Again, access, if you want to get success in this kind of community-based organizations and community-based the governance of natural resources, particularly wildlife. We need to consider their culture, their history, strongly consider the values that the communities have over the resources, think of their livelihood. Because yes, we keep on taking land from them, and next month we land more land because I'm trained as a wildlife manager originally. So when I go to the village and I see an impala and antelope watching in the village, this area is very important to be a wildlife protected area. You can see impala is there. So when I look at that one, I don't see the community livelihood is there. So it's important that we see the livelihood activities of the communities, how are they going to get the life going, but also their living standards and level of development of the community. Sometimes they are very low living standards. So even if you come there with your power, you can force them to change to the place being a protected area. But the next morning when their standard comes up, they will not accept that thing. So we look at that one, but then the political settings. So it's very important that we look at all those. Thank you so much.